That was terrific, and I love how when we get when you get a bunch of good speakers going, you get some conversations where we've had the WPA narratives mentioned several times, and we've talked about a number of different topics and the influence of the sewing machine, and I love that Dr. Squares talk about mentioning sometimes what was being worn by the enslaved, and now Kathy bringing that up, but and with a few of those quotes about from the white people just could not handle it when the Black people wanted to look good. Black people are supposed to stay in their place and look like, you know, servile people in undistinguished, colorless clothes. And the story of how both enslaved and free Blacks rejected that and asserted their autonomy and their agency, whether it's just by getting some walnut bark or berries or whatever and dyeing those damn clothes a different color or embellishing them in some way or sewing them so that they fit a little bit better, and then using some of the money they can earn from poultry or selling vegetables to buy some cloth to look fashionable on Sundays and for you know, special occasions. And you know, the white people are saying they just look so gaudy going to church. I mean, oh my God, who do they think they are? They think they're, you know, humans who deserve respect. That's who they are. And I love the accounts of hearing the agency there, and with the sewing skills, they could not only do that for themselves and their fellow African Americans, but then also after the Civil War, use those skills to earn a living, also to clothe themselves and their customers in ways where, you know, you look and, you know, follow Dr. Square and you'll see lots of photographs of fashionable African Americans, and they are claiming that agency, they are claiming that respect. And there's a lot of talk about, among scholars and also among people at the time, that there's this awareness that we do not naturally get the respect from the white community. And one way to try to claim that is by looking quote unquote respectable, which is a, you know, across genders, across economic divides, across other, you know, every other divide, the great god of respectability of the Victorian period. If we look respectable, we will demand more respect and command more respect, they hoped. But beyond that, it's just about, this is who I am, I claim that identity. So I love getting to be able to touch on that and mention that. So we now will move on to some samplers. Is that okay? Okay. Make sure you give that to Julia. Okay. We'll now move on to some samplers, and I want to mention there are these flyers are out on the desk where you came in and registered. Coming out next year is the book on the Tennessee Sampler Survey about Tennessee samplers, co-written by Jennifer Kaur and Janet Hassan. And this is part of the, I believe they will be part of this sampler archive project, but they have their own database online already, so if you can look things up in. Julia can speak more to that. And I also want to give a shout out to the Sampler Archive and the Sampler Consortium, which is trying to gather and spearhead other statewide sampler surveys, similar to the Quilt Index doing statewide things. And they also have an intake form where if you own a sampler, you can fill out their questions about what is known about that sampler. So it can become part of that database so that we can all look up, you know, what is being done by Massachusetts girls in the 1760s or the Georgian girls in the 1820s or whatever it is. So all of this, you know, the internet is a wonderful place sometimes. So with that, I will introduce Julia, who will tell us more about the Tennessee project, I hope. Julia serves as the Curator of Fashion and Textiles at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. Her work includes acquiring, cataloging, and researching textiles for the museum's collection, as well as exhibition development. She was born and raised in Massachusetts and has been with the Tennessee State Museum since 2022. She holds a BA in History and Art History from Mount Holyoke College, yay, Seven Sisters, and a Master of Letters in Dress and Textile Histories from the University of Glasgow. Thank you. Come on up.
Let me just make sure I get the clickers. Okay. Alrighty. Thank you again for inviting me to come and speak with you all today. I'm very excited to get to introduce some samplers from Tennessee, and more specifically from the collection of the Tennessee State Museum. For this presentation, because it is shorter, I want to mostly focus on how samplers can be used as kind of a lens into research. Specifically for this topic, I'm going to be focusing on women's educational opportunities in 19th century Tennessee, and using samplers as a means of just doing some research into our collection. This is not all the samplers in the Tennessee State Museum's collection. We have many, many more, but this is just a sample of some great ones that I thought would be of interest for you all today. So for educational opportunities for women in Tennessee, prior to the 19th century, there were really not any schools that I have been able to find verifiably that were larger institutions for women's education. I'm sure there were, of course, teachers and tutors and some schools at churches, but primarily girls were being sent to female academies outside of the state. Typically in the north, there were also some in the Carolinas, but the first female academy in Tennessee, which is Fisk's Female Academy, that's in Overton County in Middle Tennessee, begins in 1806. And after that, we start to see some more schools come up in the 1810s and 20s. They're again primarily in Middle Tennessee, and I did just want to have a reference image for anyone who has maybe not been to Tennessee before. The state's divided up into the 3 grand divisions, so East, Middle, and West Tennessee, and we really see these female academies showing up in Tennessee, primarily in Middle Tennessee, especially Davidson County, where Nashville is. We see a couple I have here. There's Miss Tarpley's School, which is being advertised as early as 1811. Mr. and Mrs. Green's School, which is being advertised around 1811 as well. Mrs. Barber's School, which is 1813. And even the other schools that come up around this time, again, tend to be around the Nashville area. Nashville Female Academy appears, as well as the Maryville Female Academy, which is out in East Tennessee. And then throughout the 1820s and 30s, we start to see some more schools appear, a lot in Middle Tennessee still, but also in East Tennessee and in West Tennessee. And a couple of these academies, we have samplers from the schools. These 2 samplers were both made at Locust Grove Female Academy, which is in Sumner County, which is in Middle Tennessee. And what is really excellent about these 2 samplers is they're evidence of both teaching patterns and kind of skill sets within the teaching at the school, and they also just give us some actual textual information. So you can tell there is a similar style in the border of both of these samplers. The samplers were both made around the same time in the 1830s. The sampler on the left by Elizabeth Sharp actually notes that the school is in Sumner County, which is very helpful because there are other Locust Grove Female Academies in the South. So that helps to just confirm which one we're thinking about. This Locust Grove Female Academy was located around Castellian Springs in Sumner County in the 1820s and 1830s. And the advertisements for it that I've found, it is being promoted as being managed by Mrs. Weathers and also a Mr. Malm. I've done some research to try to figure out who these folks were. Going from the school advertisements, especially this one, let me see if I can read it this far. It notes that Major Weathers had built a large and convenient brick school for the academy. So using that information, I believe that this was probably Miss Martha Washington Malm Weathers, who married Major Robert Weatherd in 1825, and they did live in Sumner County at that time. Also with her maiden name being Mom, I'd assume that Mr. Mom, who was also assisting in managing the academy, was probably a male relative, maybe a brother or a father. Haven't found that information quite yet, though I am digging. Later, as I've tried to track them, they Weatherds moved to Texas. Their graves are in Paris, Texas. But in the 1850 census, Martha is still listed as being a school teacher. So she does carry this occupation with her. I haven't been able to currently access any samplers made in Texas that share similar patterns to these. That is a step I want to undertake. This is obviously all just preliminary research I've been doing to try to increase my knowledge of our collection and how we can better interpret these objects when they go out for display or for online sharing. And then the next school that I would like to talk about is Mr. and Miss Hunt's Female Academy. This school was founded by Reverend Henry W. Hunt, who is a Methodist minister. This is in Gallatin, also in Sumner County, also around the same time period of the 1830s. You'll see it's kind of got a similar stylistic look to the previous two, not quite the same. We do have this rose border around it. And Reverend Hunt later became the principal of Gallatin Female Academy in 1835. It was suggested by Jennifer Core and Janet Hassan that that school probably absorbed Mr. and Mr. Hunt's Female Academy, which I think is probably likely considering he becomes the principal of that school. And that school is also later renamed the Sumner Female Academy. And I forgot to mention, I found this in their advertisements at the time. From 1830, they were advertising in the national banner in the Nashville Whig that they offered plain and ornamental needlework to their students at no additional charge. And this sampler was made around 1834, so around this time period. And using the sampler as kind of a material record, some research has been done into trying to figure out who made this piece and also some more information about how the school was conducted. And I must give credit here to the Tennessee Sampler Survey, which is Jennifer Core and Janet Hassan. They did a lot of this research prior to my arrival at the Tennessee State Museum. So much thanks to them for making these connections. The sampler was made by a girl named Emily May. I'm just going to double check that I have my locations correct. Emily May. And in researching kind of the records from Tennessee at that time, there were two girls named Emily May in Sumner County in the 1830s, one who was 8 and one who was between the age of about 20 to 30. The records aren't super clear, except that she is an adult. And in looking at the sampler and how sophisticated it is, and the kind of level of craftsmanship, it was thought that this was probably done by the older Emily May. And this was kind of further backed up when it's compared with this purse that we have in our collection as well. It features a similar garland of roses motif in this sampler. You can also see, maybe you can't, I don't know, it's a little small, that it says it was made at Mr. and Mrs. Hunt's Female Academy in the 1830s as well. And so it's thought that perhaps Emily May was a teacher at the academy. This sampler may have been used either as a reference for her students or as an example of needlework because it is so sophisticated and because it does feature a pattern or a style that we know is being taught to students for samplers, but also for other decorative arts and ornamental art projects like this purse. And then some more research that actually went into it, again by the sampler survey. They found that this older Emily May eventually marries Reverend P. Rowells, who becomes the principal of Gallatin Female Academy in 1836, that same year. And so it just seems to connect that a teacher at this academy marrying the now principal of the academy makes a bit more sense to have that connection to the school than this other 8-year-old Emily May, who we really don't have that much solid connection. So that was a little bit of that mystery solving that was done, and has really helped inform how we want to interpret that piece besides just being a very beautiful sampler. And this is a fairly new acquisition that we've got in this year that I'm really excited about. This is the Spring Hill Female Academy sampler. So this was made by Sanaya Virginia Crutcher in 1841. And you can see that she has put that it was made at Spring Hill Female Academy. For this research, I really tried to focus on the samplers in our collection that actually have the name of the school on them, because I just find that a very fascinating detail. I have always loved that samplers are a great kind of genealogical record, but they also can be used for more than just personal family history. Even if this wasn't made by your relative, it can tell you about the school, about the practices of teaching girls, about kind of just giving you a place to start. Because before we got this, I didn't know anything about Spring Hill Female Academy. Again, there are a lot of Spring Hill academies, not just in Tennessee, but throughout the South. And so this kind of gave me somewhere to focus on, because I was lucky enough that her name is quite unique. There's not a lot of Sanaya Crutchers out there. And so I was able to do some research into her and realize that Sanaya Crutcher was from Middle Tennessee as well. A lot of Middle Tennessee in this examples, from Maury County, and that's where the school was. The school's on the border of Maury and Williamson County in Middle Tennessee, which is right kind of a bit south of Davidson County, where Nashville is. And I was able to find some information about Sanaya's life. She later marries Dr. Kimbrough. They later moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I was able to find information about her 3 daughters, who unfortunately all did die before her, but in their 60s. She just lived until she was 80. And in doing that research, I was also able to find some connections with other resources on the school. So the school was operated under the superintendence of Mr. and Miss Ellis. This appears in the advertisements, newspaper advertisements in the Nashville Banner and the Republican Banner and the Nashville Whig as well. And in looking into that, I found that Mr. and Mrs. Ellis's name actually come up at several other female academies in Middle Tennessee. So this sampler is not in our collection. This is the one piece I'm showing you that is not in our collection. I don't have information as to whose collection it's in. It may be in a private collection, but it was surveyed by the Tennessee Sampler Survey. And this piece does say at the bottom, Miss Ellis's Female Academy, Davidson County, Davidson, Tennessee, and the date, which is 1833. I couldn't tell if that was a 3 or 4. But that helped kind of just put me on a rabbit hole of looking into where else these 2 people worked. And the Sampler Survey had done some research on that, and actually published an article in MESDA a few years ago, which was really useful for me. So they had previously been the superintendents at Marble Hill Female Academy, Porter Female Academy, and then a female academy at Hardeman's Crossroads, which I have still not found the exact name for, but they're listed in advertisements and kind of newspaper articles throughout the area of Tennessee at this time. It seems from the research that they moved to Tennessee sometime in the 1819, I believe. But these are all schools in Middle Tennessee. They're all from counties that are near each other, either from Maury County, Williamson County, or Davidson County area. And their daughter's also listed as a teacher. I have not been able to find too much information about her yet, but that's still on my agenda. As I said, this is just part of our constant trying to update the collection that we have at the Tennessee State Museum. And going through all of these newspapers and all of these kind of details about the academies also really brought me to the role and the kind of the goals of these female academies in Tennessee, particularly in the South, because needlework, ornamental work is constantly appearing as part of the curriculum when I was going through, along with, obviously math, writing, drawing, painting, music, but needlework is very popular. It continues to be up to the Civil War, and I also see it after the Civil War, which I do believe is a bit later than other geographic regions in the United States. And I really found reading through these advertisements for these female academies that there is a heavy focus on morality and kind of the role of the female academy in promoting the kind of curation of a proper young woman. So this is an advertisement from the Lebanon Female Academy from 1858. It was published in the Tennessee Baptist, but it mentions that the education of your daughter is of utmost importance in cultivating the female mind in the way of moral and intellectual improvement. And there's a very strong emphasis put on moral training. And I see this multiple times in a couple of these different advertisements. I have a few more written down here, but in a article published in the the Republican Banner in 1845 is an argument for why American women are so happy and why American women are like, I guess like it's a very pro-America. American women are so much better than European women piece. But the argument is that, the quote is that, it is this intellectual education which gives domestic happiness to the majority of American families. It is a higher principle, it is a moral and religious principle. So the idea that education will promote values of piety, modesty, domesticity, certainly become a huge part in these classes. And so I know often when I talk to people about needlework, the immediate thought is the practical side of learning needlework, because it's extremely practical to know how to sew, and also samplers is a way to learn how to read and write. But I want to kind of think beyond that and think more of the social intentions of these schools, because there's a very strong emphasis on religion, on morality, and these kind of more ornamental arts as more of a status symbol and a kind of training of women's values than necessarily the practical, because you'll note when you look through these school curriculums, there's not much emphasis put on, housekeeping or cooking or like mending. It's really the ornamental arts of music, painting, drawing, needlework that kind of reappear. And so I just wanted to feature for my last slide these two samplers that are also in our collection. I do apologize if they're not easy to read. I'm going to try to zoom in here. But the one on the left was by Martha E. Edmondson, who is in Montgomery County in Tennessee in 1816. And she has a passage right here which says, folly of envy, can you discern another's mind? Wait, isn't you envy? Envy's blind. Tell envy when she would annoy that thousands want what you enjoy. So this very eloquent little passage that she embroidered on her sampler, talking about the folly of envy. If we think about moral values, envy, jealousy being something that would be discouraged. And then in this other sampler that was done by a teacher and her student, I believe in reviewing the latest updates from the sampler survey, they believe that Melania was the teacher and Miss Nancy Murray was the student. Is a religious text referencing God, his hand is my perpetual guard. He keeps me with his eye. Why should I then forget the Lord who is forever? I believe it says right. Some of the lettering has washed off, but not washed off, rubbed off. I just really found interesting because, apologies, I was considering, as I was wrapping this up, obviously there's the actual instructing of these verses, but doing it in the textile art, I just found really significant because there is such a tactile attention to having to physically stitch a message, how much time it would take you. It reminds me a bit of writing lines, if that's a weird allegory, but when you have to write something over and over and just kind of how textiles can be used as a way of driving home these values that were so heavily held. And I'm really looking forward to, in the future, as we exhibit more samplers, as we hopefully feature more samplers on our online catalog, taking this framework and taking some of these thoughts and applying them and hoping to interpret them a bit more than just, here's a piece of, a sampler and here's what's on it, but also kind of delving a little bit more into what went on at the school, who was teaching there, what were the goals of that education, and then how it might reflect in either the maker's own work or works of various students. So that was entertaining. Thank you all. Oh, did you need to stay up here for the questions? Gotcha.
Okay. Okay, if I could have Madeline and Kathleen come back for Q&A, and what I'll have you all do is you'll trade this back and forth for answers.
Gotcha.
Okay, sorry, this is also yours. Thank you. So I know you all have a lot to say, but if you would keep it just to questions, I'll also try to do the same with our online stuff. No commentaries, just questions, because I know that we have to leave unless you wanted to stay the night, but Larry may have something to say about that. So our first question from online, I'm supposed to face the crowd, I believe is for Madeline. Did women buy their own materials or did the store provide it? In other words, was the pay for only their labor or included the cost of materials?
I don't know. They don't mention whether they're providing them with thread or needles. I do know that in the Knowles accounts, the women often get paid in needle, that they trade their labor for needles as part of what they're buying. But, I don't know if they're using those needles at home for.
Did they provide the cloth?
The things were cut out and given to them.
Okay, so they just basically constructed the garments.
Yeah.
One more for Madeline. Did you find any evidence of success in New Bedford with the reform efforts of Sarah Josepha Hale to improve the pay of women who sewed sailors' slops? Parentheses, she established shops in which women could sell their work directly, cutting out the middlemen.
No. There's the New Bedford Port Society that I mentioned, the ladies branch had that shop. The ladies branch records are in New Bedford. I have not yet gotten into them. This is why, again, please, somebody else take this over.
The next one is for Kathleen. When you were giving your presentation, why did you choose to use the word master, owner, or mistress instead of enslaver?
Part of it is trying to use the language that was used at the time. So, for example, free person of color. In Charleston, that only referred to mulatto. So you could be a free person of color and be Black, but the tendency, and you can go through the federal census records and you can go through the registers and see that there were dark-skinned free people of color. But in general, that term, at least in the Charleston Low Country area, tended to refer to someone who had a white ancestor. So I do try to use, whenever possible, the language that was used at the time.
And then one more question for you. Would Black women, free or enslaved, who had many customers and orders to fill, have themselves hired shop assistants, either free or enslaved?
Okay, if you were enslaved, you couldn't enslave another person or hire another person because you weren't a person. You were property. Free people of color were not citizens, so you can't, or you can say denizen, but you can't ever say citizen because they weren't citizens in the United States either. But those folks could purchase slaves and hire them out. They could hire other free persons of color to work for them. Most of these women were working out wherever their shop was also where they were living. And it could have been 2 rooms. In Charleston, and obviously it's what I know the best out of all of the cities that I study, you could have a little room somewhere and then go work for the person who's hired you. So you would work in that household rather than, or you could take work home, but yeah.
Audience question?
Julia, the 18th century New England samplers that I'm familiar with used a wide variety of stitches. Do you see that in the Tennessee samplers, or are they mostly freehand embroidery and cross stitch?
So I will give this answer with the clarification that I've only observed in person the samplers that we have at our collection, which is about 60, oh, it might be up to 68 now, samplers. I see mostly cross stitch. We do have samplers in the collection with more like embroidered elements, some pictorial elements. But generally what I'm encountering is primarily cross stitch, some other basic like embroidery stitches. But I do know in comparison with samplers I've seen up in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, quite that level of different techniques. I haven't observed, but again, I'm primarily working with samplers from our collection that are primarily made by a young woman. I think we only have a very small number that are made by adult women, and those might be more skilled in the Tennessee region. I hope that is helpful.
Thank you for all your your talks, but my question is for Kathleen, of course. There's so much overlap between our research areas. And I had a question about, and I was talking to Angela about this during the lunch break, but like the mercurial changing definitions of textile nomenclature. And I wonder how you sort of deal with the changing meanings of textiles over the course of the 18th into the 19th centuries.
Right, that is a good question, because Negro cloth, for example, in South Carolina in the 18th century was wool. Other places it's cotton or linen, or it's a cotton and wool mix. But in the 18th century, at least in South Carolina, when they were importing Negro cloth, that was wool cloth that a lot of that went to the Native American trade. So it's not even relevant for plantation use until later on in that century. So I'd say if you're writing for publication, those kinds of distinctions have to be made at, it's like every decade or whatever it is. Those kinds of distinctions do have to be made because I think it speaks a lot to how the economies are changing. And whether wool is then replaced with a plant fiber because it might be less expensive, it might be more available. The plantations I studied were still raising sheep into the Civil War era for both mutton for use as food, and then those sheep would be shorn and the material used for clothing. So it's a great question, but yeah, I think every step of the way you have to stop and say, is this what I really am talking about? Yeah, is it the same? Is it equivalent?
I had a question for Julia. So I noticed a lot of the samplers that you have in there are from like the 1820s, 1830s, from like the female academies. Was there like a really big research or I guess surge of opening those schools at the time, or is that just kind of like what you happen to have in your collection?
No, that's a great question. And actually, I didn't initially intend that until I was reviewing my presentation. I was like, oh, these are all from like the same time period generally. I did in my research, I tried going just through documentation to see when schools were opening. There is a bigger surge of them opening in the 1830s, 1820s, 1830s, 1840s through like, the 1870s. After the Civil War, there's still a lot of them opening, but less because then you start to see public education being established, especially in like the Nashville area and other kind of larger cities. But our collection we do have spanning from, we have some early pieces from like, I think our earliest one is from the 1810s through the 30s, 40s, 50s is primarily what we have. We do have some samplers after the 1860s and the Civil War, but production does go down quite a bit because the Civil War does so drastically affect education in the state, particularly in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Nashville in specific, because I've been local to the area. A lot of those schools were closed during the Civil War, never reopened. Nashville Female Academy, which was a really large and old academy, was actually used as barracks for soldiers. And so that does production does go down after that time period. But we do have a range. We have some from, after the Civil War as well, but less.
All right, I think that's all the questions. Oh, do you have a question? Well, guess what? It is time for Alden to wrap it up.
Thank you all so much. It's been a great day. We've all got these ideas popping all around our minds, and we're going to be able to continue the conversation tomorrow. But also, I wanted to say, any of you who want to keep talking and keep meeting each other, talk to Sam Dorsey right over there. She has made a reservation at a very nearby place called Immigrant Food, just a short walk up the hill. And if you want to go and have happy hour, and they can feed you for dinner if you last that long and still want to do stuff. So, please find each other. The lovely thing about being here in person is that we can start having these conversations and get to know new colleagues. So please talk amongst yourselves and continue that constant conversation and do all that. So we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Thank you.